I've been spending some time recently in the last week viewing a number of videos that cover, the body cam stuff with police officers, law enforcement officers, and um, and how this relates to trauma-based mind control, if you will, MK Ultra stuff, and because of the experiences that I had in my own youth that were not that I was experiencing abuse, if you will. And of course, abuse can come through a lot of different pathways. Not all of it is physical. In other words, what you see in the mirror with using exotic weapons as a result of those that don't want to give up control over universal and galactic gate networks. Okay. Competition between seeded star races, right? And this is when we get into trust issues and all the rest of it. And of course, the polarity game. But I wanted to, because I've been leaving a lot of comments up, particularly with addressed to the law enforcement community that puts certain videos up, particularly when it comes to sharing information related to healing and trauma and how we arrived at how we got here to begin with, because of my own experiences of knowing that child abuse leads to self-abuse, and that leads to abuse of their own children. That goes on generation after generation after generation, which becomes a source of energy for a black hole system. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. But as it relates to law enforcement in particular, because I grew up in California, and because there is how would I put it, an incremental rise or acceleration of events, which is an experience that law enforcement are now experiencing to a greater degree, central nervous system disruptions, okay, which means their own central nervous system is now experiencing a greater acceleration of stress as a result of counter space moves by something that is acknowledging that it's losing more and more energy as a result of shields being up, and that would be obviously the increase in the speed at which separation takes place between one spiral and another, if you will, okay? As a result, in the use of energy to experience what you experience, right, at the opening and closing of a magnetic moment. And so one of the things that I learned when I was a child, particularly through my father, who was well-versed, if you will, on historical stuff when it relates to monarchy, or if you will, how a system, an APIN system, is set up between units of consciousness that are connected to each other, that are experiencing each other, running software on a motherboard, okay? And how this relates to the way that a political system is set up. So I'm going to use America as an example, where you have three branches of government at the federal level, and then you have state, and then you have county, and then you have city. And one of the things that I remember that was very important to me, because I watched a video not too long ago by the sheriff of Siskiyou County in Northern California, and I've lived in Siskiyou County, and I know the folks that live up there, and particularly when it comes to all the marijuana growers that are there and the problems that they're having now as a result of that. Okay? And where, for example, the current sheriff in Siskiyou County was mentioned apparently a couple months ago when they went to respond out to apparently an area where the marijuana growers had an establishment, they were told by apparently quite a few folks that they weren't wanted there. Okay? Now, what my father mentioned to me when I was a child growing up is that the highest ranking law enforcement officer in a state of any jurisdiction is a county sheriff. And the reason for that is simple. A county sheriff is not an appointed official. Okay? That sheriff represents the people in that county. The people that live in that county, okay, or who gave that man the authority to be in that power. And what that means is that the sheriff is the most powerful law enforcement officer in any state. Because all he has to do is deputize and arm every citizen within that county. That's an army. Okay? So what that means is that there isn't a city police, and including state police, because you got to remember who state police is. They work under what? What? The executive, right? So you have the highest ranking law enforcement officer in every state is a sheriff. So imagine that every sheriff in every county, for example, in the state of California, deputized every citizen within every county to go after the racketeers, right? Because remember, who pays the sheriff? The people who live in that county, because they're elected by the people, right? Because all a county sheriff has to do is deputize every citizen. That's a posse, right? So this is one of the reasons why Siskiyou County in particular, if you go back historically to before World War II, what was known as Jefferson County. And the reason that they wanted to separate and become Jefferson State was because the people who live in that area were not being properly represented by either Sacramento in California or in Oregon, which would be what? Salem. So how this relates to current events in particular is not just with the marijuana growers up in Siskiyou County, but the enforcement power through the system that was set up that the people actually have that live within these counties, okay, that their elected law enforcement officer that a sheriff has, because a sheriff can actually go to a police chief and deputize him as part of the county sheriff's office. Okay? Because a police chief is appointed through the city council, through the process they set up. Okay? So a police chief is not an elected official. Okay? I know. And so it's not like, because I've known this ever since I was a little kid, and particularly when you see it through the Illuminati, you know, now we're back to 26 constellations, the polarity drama between -13 and +13, D13 current, the reversal, the Metatronic, and all that. Okay? And how this all sort of fits into a nice rainbow bridge safe zone. All right? And why we're experiencing what we are now. So I have an enormous amount of compassion, even though you realize there's like what they used to call the coin of the realm. There's two sides of the coin, right? Negative and positive magnetic polarity, pre-matter phase consciousness, non-polarity, experiencing eternal unconditional love, right? God is the ultimate authority because that's the highest superconductor law, which is perfect balance in every sphere of consciousness that is experiencing itself being loved. So love is the law, right? And it's non-negotiable. Okay? Now we're back to either or, right? Knowing one from the other, right? I simplify it, and that's knowing the difference between a deadlight magnet and a living eternal magnet being one. While creation, we're gifting electrons so that we're all experiencing being loved, because that's what heals us. Right? And so this is one of the reasons why when I've watched a number of videos, how polite and courteous, trying to keep, you know, the peace. Because originally, remember Patty Broussard, peacekeepers, teachers, and healers. 3, right? H2 plus 1 equals 3. The others, the othernet, and the atmospherics, atmospheric consciousness, hydrogen consciousness, phosphorus consciousness, elemental command, right? Self-generating what you need out of whole cloth, which means you're not needing any money in order to experience forever. That kind of stuff. And sort of how this sort of relates to the law enforcement community, particularly now. And having grown up in Southern California and hearing that the two deputies, for example, lost their lives. One guy was just shot simply because the guy that shot a deputy in other words, this guy apparently was wanted and knew that if he got caught and he was put in a cage again, now we're back into cages, leashes, and collars, and now we're back into parents and children, right? And child abuse or abuse, period. Any unit of consciousness aware of itself being abused goes dark mirror. Lost its light. So I tried to quantify this one time on how much energy it's going to take to heal the entire universal galactic template. Right? Quantify that. And why certain beings would be willing to come into a black hole and as a salvage mission. Right? So I know how that's explained because I know how that's experienced, because it would be the same thing as saying that eternal unconditional love or an eternal God does not live in fear of jumping into a black hole, because it began with what that is anyway. So it means I'm not going to lose anything that I didn't already start with, that it began with. Right? Now we're back into the fear part of letting go of every electron, because an electron is consciousness energy. So they live in fear of letting go of their own energy to serve, to be a multiversal hub server on behalf of the all creation. Now they're experiencing all of it. Now they're connected with all of it. Now they can go wherever they want to go because they're experiencing what love is that goes on forever, gifting electrons. That's the ultimate permit, right? Yeah. So that's why I don't need a contract to do the work that I do. It comes natural. Love is the natural flow of energy. Love is the natural flow of consciousness energy creation, which is an engine. So when you're experiencing the eternal spirit of fire, right? The torque speed differential between in matter and not in matter is it's going to take time to load the program. The programmable matter. In matter, out of matter. Inner matter, out of matter. Right? And the speed at which the pixel resolution of the holographic eyeballs experiencing what you're experiencing, color, shape, form, and flow of the energy, is the mirror. Boy, it took no time at all to load that. So now that's why you're into the Know Me planet and stealth code speed, right? To get work done. Otherwise, you're going to be interfered with. You'll be redirected into a consciousness trap to hold your energy captive as a source of energy, right? And feed on. All right. So you're not going to be any good as tech support on a universal level, right? Universal tech support, tech operators, software operators, tech support. When you used to call up Verizon, hey, I need tech support. Something's going on with my system here. I'm not getting, there's a glitch in the system, right? Right? Error codes. There are error codes. Too many error codes being generated in this matrix. A broken motherboard. Over the control of a motherboard, or over control over grid networks. Control over APIN networks. Control over matrices, right? Now we're back to the director of programming, right? Collision courses, as a result of not obeying the command function, which is a hierarchy between seated races, right? And what it means to thrive together on behalf of experiencing being one, which is the evolution of that consciousness is to let go. Otherwise, you hold your own consciousness captive to what we're held captive to, which is what? Control. So control becomes a dilemma. An eternal God doesn't have any dilemma over control because it's not holding anything captive. Instead, that's an eternal engine. Right? of gifting electrons. So that's where you get into counterintuitive, counter space intuitive. That's counterintuitive, right? Positive space intuition, zero space. Always at that single point, which it all began, never left home. Experiencing what love is goes on forever. So I thought I'd just share this because I try and put some positive energy and sharing with some of these channels that are, because a lot of folks that are in the law enforcement community that are out there performing these jobs every day. And what I experienced when I was a kid growing up, most of the folks that I worked with as a firefighter that were officers knew that the folks that they were working for that were cutting their paycheck were gangsters.